All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Healthspan Academy. I'm your host, Craig Shearhart, and joining me today is Dr. Nichola Conlon. She's an expert in aging science. So if we go back to her education history, she started with an undergrad in physiological science from University of Newcastle, and then continued on to a master's in medical and molecular biosciences, and then completed a Ph.D. in molecular physiology. And she worked for a few years then as a research scientist with E Therapeutics. And then in 2017, started her own business called Nuchido, which is specialized in linking academic research basically into consumer products that help with reversing aging. Nichola, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you, Craig. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Cool. Well, I want to start the chat with sort of how this all began. How did you first get interested in longevity? How did that path kind of unwind for you?
Yeah, great question to start on. So aging wasn't a particular area of biology that I was that familiar with, if I'm quite honest with you. I was, completed, as you just mentioned, my undergrad, my PhD in something called Epithelial Physiology, which is all about how drugs and nutrients can pass over cell membranes and go from, your gut where you've taken them orally and pass through into the body and the blood where they're needed. So that was a particular focus I had, which led me to my role working in drug discovery, because obviously those areas of physiology play a big role in the bioavailability of drugs. So making sure drugs get to where they need to work. Mm-hmm. So I went to work in the world of drug development. And while I was working there, I was basically given the opportunity to run a new project within the company, which was a project developing drugs to slow aging.
Cool.
Now that is, even for me, that was like, wow, okay. I didn't even know this was a thing. But I was basically told, this is a really credible area of science that's really rapidly developing.
Right.
There seems to be a lot of breakthroughs that are showing that we can slow cellular aging. Mm-hmm. And, the main purpose of this is to extend health span, which, you have in your title, your podcast.
There you go.
that period of our lives that we're living in good health, because aging is our biggest risk factor for all of the multiple diseases that big drugs companies are actually trying to cure, essentially. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, well, if all of these diseases that we're suffering from actually have the root cause that is aging, then why don't we tackle the root cause? And that's where this field has kind of emerged from.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And we're going to get into some details on the label of aging as a treatable disease in a second. Just kind of like to backpedal a little bit, I think like people can get a little bit too deep into the biohacking world where they're like, oh, let's take all these supplements and never exercise or eat like crap. So, and I think like for a lot of people that it's a given, right? That you're eating properly and you're sleeping properly, you're monitoring your mental health and all those pieces. And if you do that stuff, the stuff that we're going to get into today, I think can really make a big impact with reversing aging. And then when we start to look at that framework of aging as an actual disease. So
yeah. I completely agree with that. That's so good to hear, because there are a lot of people who, think, well, you can just take supplements or have treatments and, that will be the answer to everything. But, I always say myself, you need to get your house in order first.
Sure,
so that get on top of those basics first.
Yeah. And I think our society is just so driven to quick fix, like, oh, here's a pill to reverse aging. I don't have to do any of their stuff. So yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page there. So let's talk about that label of aging as a disease, because that seemed like a pretty big turning point for me when the WHO kind of put that label where we can now look at it not just as something that just happens, but all of the chronic disease and stuff can be traced back to aging. So you've had kind of that academic background, you've had the background in industry. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that event and the framework around aging as a disease and how that's probably going to change the industry in the next like 5 to 10 years. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think that it is something, that will happen within our lifetimes, that it will be classified as a disease. We will take drugs to actually slow down that rate of cellular aging, because all of the scientific evidence now unequivocally shows that aging, getting older, putting on years is actually one of the worst things we can do for our health.
Right.
So if you look at the top diseases that we're suffering from as a society, things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia. If you look at the graphs, they're literally tracking flat until you hit middle age. And then your risk of everything, just goes up to a phenomenal level.
Right.
So this is where the ideas really came from, is that scientists began to say, well, we're trying to treat all of these diseases individually. We have research groups that don't talk to each other, trying to treat everything individually. Right. And actually, they've all got the same underlying root cause, which is aging. Right. So actually, let's turn this on the head and go, well, is aging the disease? And things like dementia, cancer are like symptoms of aging.
Right.
So it's this complete different way of thinking about it. Yeah. And what these scientists did was they basically said, well, let's look at it this way. Let's start in cell models and move into mammals and see if we can slow aging, do we actually hit multiple diseases in one go? Can we reduce the risk of multiple things in one go? And yes is the answer. So, 10 years ago, people were laughed at for saying they were going to try this. Now you wouldn't find a single person in this field that would say it's a silly idea anymore, because the evidence is so strong.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And that's got, I was geeking out over that because just as I was reading, I think I first came across that when I read Lifespan with David Sinclair, which
great book.
Definitely my mind blew up at that point. I was like, what? so it's cool. I'm looking forward to getting into the nitty gritty. So we talk, obviously it starts with a better understanding of what's going on at a cellular level with aging. And we know telomere length is a big issue. We know mitochondrial function is a big issue, and the role of NAD and all that, and ATP production. So talk about that relationship between those kind of variables and what can happen at a cellular level that starts to lead to those symptoms that we see in aging.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's really important to remember about aging and I guess about any biology is that it's incredibly complex.
Right.
And there is never one thing that is leading to the sort of symptoms or, the way we present as aging. For sure. There's actually multiple complex things going on within our bodies that's actually all contributing to it. And as scientists, what we tend to do is categorize these things. So we've developed a framework called the hallmarks of aging, which you will be familiar with if you've read the Lifespan book, which categorizes these key things that are these key failings that are happening within our bodies that all contribute towards aging. And if, what it really all boils down to is that our bodies simply are not designed to be living as long as they actually are.
Right.
So in terms of evolution, if you think about it, we've evolved to actually live quite short lives. So until about 200 years ago, we were very, very lucky if we would live past the age of 40.
Yeah.
We'd get to childbearing age and we'd probably die of childbirth if you're a woman, or a tooth abscess, or, a disease. But now, due to incredible advancements of sanitation, healthcare and things, we're now all of a sudden living well into our 80s. And our biology has not been designed to live until 80. So we're kind of in this new territory. And, I always like to say we've evolved to be good at being young, but not good at being old. So all of our cellular mechanisms and repair and things like that is all very good at keeping us to get to reproductive age, but it's not designed to keep our bodies repaired and in good health until the late ages that we're living now. So a lot of what it boils down to is that we get a lot of cellular damage building up. And a lot of systems within ourselves that start to fail, and that damage accumulates, and ultimately that manifests as the signs and symptoms that we call aging.
Right. Interesting. So, and let's get into sort of what the scope is for Nichito. You guys have some pretty exciting stuff going on, and I think it's awesome. And to me, just sort of legitimizes it a little bit when you have that academic background. And it's not somebody that's just looking to get the quick cash out. So talk about the scope of the business, how you started that, product development, and how that sort of came together.
Yeah, well, when I worked in drug development, there were a couple of things that really stood out to me that were quite frustrating. The first was that there was all this incredible science going on that actually showed, you could slow cellular aging, and there were real benefits that people could have from this. However, drug development takes a very long time. It takes about 10 to 15 years for any of that science to actually reach the public that are going to benefit from it. So that was really frustrating for me. The second thing was, whilst we were like investigating molecules that could slow aging in cells, what would happen is, part of my job was I would get a list of molecules back from the lab with, say a top 10 of what worked and actually reversed cellular aging. And quite often what would happen would be the top 5, although they worked really well, drugs companies simply wouldn't be interested in them because they weren't patentable. And if a drugs company can't patent a molecule, it will not put it into development, no matter how good it is.
Right.
And this is because they will not pay the hundreds of millions of costs to develop a drug if they can't own the patent, which means they're the only people that can sell it for the next 20 years, basically. Right. Which I can understand from a commercial perspective, that makes total sense. But what didn't make sense to me was that a lot of these molecules that actually worked really well were already pretty well known and safe and well-studied molecules. Things that, people were already quite familiar with, but perhaps didn't realize that they had the particular benefits in terms of aging that they did, or more so you could use particular combinations that people might not have been familiar with, and they would actually have good impact. So, basically, I just decided that I was going to leave that world, and I was going to set up Nichido, which was to basically, as a way of translating all of this incredible science into products that people could benefit from now. So consumer products, so supplements, topicals, things that didn't have to be, 10 to 15 years down a drug development pipeline.
Awesome. So let's get into the X's and O's of how the role of NAD. I feel like the research has just blown up in this stuff in the last like 10 years, maybe. What exactly is NAD and what is its role? And when we talk about mitochondrial function?
Yeah. So NAD is the first area of aging science that we decided to focus on at Nichido. Mainly because it is such an exciting area of research. So basically, when I spoke before about these breakthroughs that are demonstrated that you can actually slow cellular aging and increase health span, NAD is one of the major breakthroughs in this area. So it's a natural molecule that's basically found in every single cell in your body. And it's involved in 2 really important things. The first thing it's involved in is energy production. So basically converting the food that you eat into the cellular energy, which is ATP, which is basically what everything in your cell needs to function. The second thing that NAD is really important for is cellular maintenance and repair.
Right.
So when your NAD levels are high, cellular maintenance and repair will be turned up, making sure the cell's in good health. And when cellular NAD goes down, maintenance and repair also gets turned down. And that's important because if NAD becomes low, cellular maintenance and repair goes down and you get damage. And as we've mentioned, damage in the cell accumulates and leads to the signs and symptoms of aging in very simple terms.
Right.
So the link between NAD and aging is that NAD has actually been found to decline in our bodies as we get older. And it's quite a significant decline. So it's estimated that around every 20 years, your NAD levels half. And this is from birth. So by age 20, you've already kind of lost half of this really critical molecule, which is pretty scary. So, never mind 20s, by the time you're getting 50 and beyond, you really have minimal levels of NAD left, which is not good for your cells because it's so important to their physiological function. So scientists said, well, okay, so if we have this NAD molecule that's decreasing, it's obviously not good for our cells. Why don't we not let it decrease as we get older? So they did various experiments which demonstrated that if you didn't let NAD decline as you got older and you kept the levels high or actually just restored low levels back to youthful levels, it had a significant impact on health span. And all that damage and that accumulation of DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, all the things that lead to aging, it could actually reverse them. So that was a huge breakthrough because NAD is something you can actually restore.
Right.
It's something that you can actually do something about.
Right.
So when we started Nishido, there were already companies and labs that were developing supplements to try and basically boost cellular NAD levels.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of looked at how they were doing it, and we were like, okay, can we do a better job than this? Yeah. Based on all of the latest science and, my background in drug development and knowing how to identify active molecules that really work, mm-hmm. can we develop an NAD supplement that people can have access to now that actually works a lot better to restore cellular NAD levels than some of the things that were currently out there on the market?
Right. So I know I assume there's lifestyle issues that we can at least somewhat impact it. And then there's supplementation, and then there's also injections. And I haven't looked too deep in the literature, but I remember hearing something that there's evidence that it's also a signaling molecule. So it can actually decrease your natural production. Where does that lie now? Where's the research? What is the research telling us about NAD as a signaling molecule?
So NAD is a signaling molecule.
Right.
Basically, it's the fluctuations in NAD that switch things on and off.
Mm-hmm.
So if your NAD is high, it switches on, cellular maintenance repair things.
Mm-hmm.
It activates various longevity genes such as the sirtuins, which then go on to switch a whole other host of beneficial things on in the cell. So it's all about having the right levels of NAD. And if you looked at your NAD levels throughout the day, they naturally, fluctuate. They go up and down a bit like a wave.
Right.
And it's that natural variation that actually switches things on and off. So that's where the signaling comes from. And when you talk about lifestyle has a huge impact on NAD levels.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, the two big things that we know are really good for you: exercise and not eating too much, so intermittent fasting. Both of those, their beneficial effects work by activating pathways that increase levels of NAD in our bodies.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Let's talk about some of the results that you guys have seen already. I know you reported 242% increase in NAD in some of these levels, and talk about why exactly that's important and I guess, and what that means to us. Do we know how much that means in terms of our symptoms and how we're going to feel in terms of our aging and a lot and those kind of variables?
Yeah. So we basically took a different approach to boosting NAD. So a lot of the supplements that are out there kind of report about a 40 to 60% increase in NAD levels when taking these supplements. And basically the way that they work is they, within the supplements, include an ingredient which is a precursor to NAD. So people may have heard of things like NR, nicotinamide riboside, or NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide. And they are basically the raw materials that the body needs to make into NAD, because NAD is quite a big molecule. So generally what happens is the body imports the material to make it, and then it puts it all together in the cell into this bigger NAD molecule. Now that was great, back sort of 6-7 years ago when we didn't really know why NAD was declining. And it does boost NAD to about 40 to 60%. However, all of the scientific studies now show that the reason our NAD declines is not because we have a lack of the raw material to make NAD. That's not an issue at all. There's no evidence to show that. The real issue is that our cells, two things actually. Our cells actually start using way more NAD. So they actually start wasting it. So there's lots of things that become overexpressed in our cells that are inflammatory processes that actually eat up NAD and break it down really unnecessarily. And secondly, our cells have a really good recycling mechanism for NAD. So even if it's being used up wastefully, in young cells, they can recycle the breakdown products of NAD and make it straight back into fresh NAD again. And that is the key thing that declines as you get older. Your cell's ability to actually recycle NAD when it's being used up. So our supplement works totally differently. It basically acts to restore that recycling pathway in the cells and also inhibit the processes that are unnecessarily breaking down NAD. And when we tested this in our pilot study, we found that it boosted NAD levels by 242%, which is significantly better than just putting in a raw material.
Yeah, that's amazing. So And I mean, so cellular things, like I think like most people, like a lay person is going to think, okay, my NAD's levels upgrade. Does that mean my hair is going to get less gray? Like my skin's going to age slower? Have you gotten to that point now where we're starting to get more into the high level symptoms and what this is affecting, or how much do we know on that level, on a macro level, of what's happening?
Yeah, so a lot actually, because sometimes I risk sounding like, NAD is going to be this cure all for everything because it has so many benefits. But the thing you have to remember is NAD is literally in every cell in your body.
Right.
And therefore its decline affects a lot of different things. But the major benefits of boosting your NAD levels, particularly in older people, are energy. Right. So, this generally, as people get older, they start to lose that natural flair and that natural, get up and go and that energy to get on and do things. And, that is the main benefit that people report, just having that extra energy to be able to get on and do stuff and not feeling knackered all the time. But not just physical energy, mental energy as well. Right. So a huge amount of NAD is obviously used in the brain to generate the energy for our brain. And as we get older, we can experience brain fog, neurodegenerative diseases. Right. And there's been a lot of studies reporting some really good results in those areas by boosting and restoring NAD levels.
So it's actually just slowing cognitive decline.
So huge studies. There's if you went on PubMed and looked at the link between NAD levels and neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, there's a huge amount of information and data there supporting, boosting NAD levels for this. But then, you just mentioned the other things that, are maybe a bit more superficial. The amount of customers that we have just coming and emailing us about their nails and their hair, and actually the gray hair, and funnily enough, it tends to be men and not women. Oh, really? Who are emailing us saying, oh, my hair is coming back black again. And, my nails are so strong. But again, it's not surprising because your hair, nails, things like that, they're sort of last in the pecking order when it comes to the health of your body. So, if the rest of your body's being fed enough NAD, then it's got some left over for the less important parts.
Wow, that is so exciting. So and I think like the cognitive decline, I think it's just that piece. You just think like, that's something I don't have to worry about till my 70s or 80s, but there's like evidence that starts as early as 30. So like you're going to get tangible results, much, much earlier in your age. I think like, it's just one of those things that sneaks up on you, right? Your cognitive decline. It's not like you notice it overnight. Like, oh man, I can't remember things anymore. It's just like, and it's so subtle. So that's really exciting to hear about that.
It is. And particularly in women. So we have a lot of customers who are menopausal or perimenopausal women. And obviously in the menopause, you get a very sudden shock with your cognitive function and brain fog. It's had particular benefits in those groups of people who can actually really feel a difference and notice a difference because their kind of loss of cognitive function has happened quite quickly, that they really do notice that it's gone, and then they really can notice if something's had an effect on improving it. So actually we're about to do a study looking into this and actually getting some good data on it rather than just anecdotal data from customers.
Oh, that's very exciting. So and I'm sure you have a wide range of people that are using this, everyone from kind of the layperson that's like not what I've heard of NAD once versus like and we talked about this before getting on. Do you have an idea of what those biomarkers are looking like? Like if we look at, I think the most common things we talk about sleep markers or like, or glucose monitors. Do we have an idea of what kind of impact we have with your products kind of in those outcomes?
Yeah, well, so we're actually studying this in our clinical trial that we're doing at the moment. So our initial pilot study that we carried out was with 2 people, and that was looking a lot more at the more cellular markers that, you can only measure if you're a scientist working in a lab, things like gene expression and things like that. But in our clinical trial, as well as measuring all that, we're now doing a double-blinded placebo-controlled crossover study with 28 people. We are actually looking more at some tangible markers that everyone can measure. One of the things that we're really interested is inflammatory markers. So there's a very clear link now that's emerged between NAD and chronic low-level inflammation. It's kind of a chicken and an egg situation as to which one's causing which. But looking at levels of cytokines, so inflammatory markers in the blood, we would expect to see those reduce. Which is obviously good, because generally as we get older, we suffer from chronic low-level inflammation, which can affect so many things with your health. NAD has been heavily implicated in improving metabolic disorders. So things like diabetes, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease. There's certainly an element of looking at your glucose tolerance in that as well. That there are some more how can you say it, more normal or more accessible blood markers that can be measured, as opposed to looking at gene expression and other crazy things that we tend to investigate.
That's super exciting. So I mean, I think like the number looks at, we see 242, like, do we know if there's an upper limit? Like, do we get to a percentage or like, okay, maybe it shouldn't be that high? Like, is the more the better? Where are we at with that kind of research?
Yeah. I mean, I think, gosh, if anyone had developed anything that could get it even near back to useful levels, that would be amazing. But I don't, it is incredibly difficult to boost it. And although 242 sounds high, that's still a long way off what we've lost, even by the time we're in our 30s. And the key thing is that it's completely normal for the body to have high NAD levels. It's not like you're artificially elevating something that shouldn't be there. Your NAD levels should be high. That's what we're born with. That's what we have throughout our sort of reproductive years. And again, back to this evolutionary thing, we're not designed to live this long. So we're like kind of getting to the point where our bodies are like, oh, we've using it all up and we shouldn't be using this much. And, we shouldn't have to be recycling this much. So it's how we can keep those youthful systems switched on for longer to continue the beneficial work that they do by producing NAD and supporting the rest of the body.
Right. That's awesome. Let's talk about like the next 5 to 10 years. What do you see being the biggest change in academically and maybe commercially? Like where do you see the landscape changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think we're going to start seeing some very big changes. So certainly in the last sort of 7 years that I've been involved in this field, and when I first got into it, it was very hush hush, even within the science community, I think half the people didn't really know what was going on. Now that's completely different. I mean, going to conferences and things, the level, it's like full of investors, not just scientists anymore. It's all investors at the conferences. And it's a lot more like what I would have been used to going to a drug development conference. And now I'm going to an aging conference, and it's got these huge investors there that would normally be putting all the money into big pharma. They're like putting it into aging research because they can see that this is the future. We're really struggling. I don't know what the stats are in your country, but in the UK, we have a huge issue with an aging population. The fastest growing segment of our population is the 85 plus. Yeah. And, in not that many years, I think it's some crazy stat, like 1 in 5 people will be over the age of 65. It's, and the key thing is these people aren't in good health. So we need to do something about it. And clearly the current practices aren't really working. So I think it's a huge emphasis on not only, it's lifestyle, like you say, you've got to emphasize that part of it to begin with, but then also how can we support those lifestyle efforts with perhaps something like taking a pill every day that would slow cellular aging.
Right. That's awesome. It's very exciting to see how this is going to pan out.
Yeah, it sounds crazy saying it.
Yeah.
Like I still, say it and like, wow, that sounds crazy. And I think,
Sounds
a
like
lot of people
Marvel
who,
movie.
yeah, well, a lot of people who
Yeah.
aren't following this field must think, okay, this is never going to happen, but it's happening.
Yeah, that's wild.
What I work on.
Yeah. That's cool. Let's circle into Nicola's personal habits. I think it's kind of easy to get lost in the landscape. So, and there's a lot of different directions we can take our own fitness and health these days. Where are your personal priorities around your health and fitness, and what do your habits look like around those priorities?
So for me, I am a huge advocate of the basics.
Yeah.
I'm nearly 35 and I don't feel like I need to do any extreme, sort of therapies or anything just yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the minute for me, it's all about, keeping the basics going, and that is good sleep, exercise, good food, and it sounds boring and people probably want to go, no, tell me some crazy things that you take. But in all honesty, that is so important. The lifestyle interventions can have a huge impact on your health.
For sure.
But one thing I do that's, not as conventional as just doing your exercise is I really track my blood. So I have my bloods taken every 6 months. In the UK, we have like a finger prick blood testing service where you can just sort of do it at home yourself, send it away, get all the results. And I'm a huge fan of it because I always say we have sick care, not health care. We only ever go to the doctors once we're already sick.
Right.
And then they're measuring our blood and they're going, oh, well, this could be abnormal, or it could be normal. I'm not really sure because you've never had that thing measured in your blood before. So then what they do is they compare it to average.
Right.
And nobody's average.
Yeah.
We're all individuals.
So true. They only really care if you're like borderline deathbed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, what might be normal for the rest of the population might not be normal for me. But how am I ever going to know that if I don't know what normal for me is? So I track a lot of different biomarkers in my blood. And it's quite nice because most of the time they're just flatlined, and which is good. I don't want to see a change. I want to know that's normal for me. But what it does mean is that if suddenly one starts to creep up or down, or, it starts to change, I know straight away that something that's not right for me.
Right.
So why is that changing?
Right.
So, and then there's ways that you can do something about it. Whereas quite often things show up in our blood before they show up as physical, signs and symptoms of a disease. You can track, you can, see things early. So I would really recommend that people get to know their blood.
The blood don't lie.
Yeah.
Well, this has been amazing, Nichola. I really appreciate you taking the time. What's the best way for people to learn more about you and your business?
Follow us on Instagram. So it's at Nuchido, Nuchido. And cool. Me, I'm quite active on Instagram. It's at Dr. Nichola Conlon. I'm sure you'll put all that in the notes. And then our website is nuchido.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we will put links to all your goodies in the show notes. Well, thanks so much for sitting in today, guys. And we'll see you next time on Healthspan Academy.